This meeting is being recorded.
Yes, the meeting is being recorded. Welcome into the Three Guys Talking Ball podcast. We got a recurring guest with us today after there's some big news in Nebraska. We'll get a little bit here before I'll do my rundown. We'll break down the college football championship weekend. Got the playoff matchups set. The NFL Chiefs got a couple of Chiefs fan on this one today, so they're looking to avenge a loss. Talk about that. The Bison live to see another week, but we're gonna start off like we talked about it. That there's been some new coaching changes, and to help break it down, we bring on our good friend, recurring guest, voice of Memorial Stadium at Nebraska, Nate Rohr. Nate, how's it going? And before we get into it, as you can see, Grant has his Iowa stuff on, and since Nebraska has the better corn, the floor is yours. You can roast Grant away if you want.
Oh, hey, we have the better corn, and at least for 60 minutes, we have the better football team. I mean, the shocking part to me about that game was Nebraska basically out Iowa'd Iowa from the standpoint that they made fewer mistakes. And Iowa made a bunch, especially in the first half. And as it turns out, it was just enough for Nebraska to go out and get the win. So that was a pretty fun day after Thanksgiving. It's not what I saw coming. I worried that Nebraska would be out of gas. There were some significant concerns, especially at linebacker, about what Nebraska would be able to do defensively, but they hung in there. They got some takeaways early, and they were able to capture a victory. So I got to admit, the day after Thanksgiving was pretty fun at the expense of the Hawkeyes.
Yeah, and then after that, they got the new head. They got the guy they've wanted in Matt Rule. What's kind of the word? What's your initial reaction to them going with Rule as the next head coach?
Makes a lot of sense. I think his personality is very well suited to the Big Ten. He grew up in State College, Pennsylvania, and was a walk-on linebacker at Penn State. So his football DNA fits the Big Ten very well. Even his Baylor teams were very good line of scrimmage teams, good defensive teams, relatively speaking, to the Big 12 conference. So I think he'll be able to build the sort of teams in the Big Ten that can win. And I think we've really gotten an education over the last few years about the blueprint for winning football in the Big Ten. And in a lot of ways, our suspicions about Big Ten football have been confirmed. Line of scrimmage works. Having great offensive linemen, great defensive linemen, tight ends, guys with neck rolls on your defense, that works. That's what Michigan has. That's, the thought that Big Ten football was going away from the Michigan, Wisconsin, Iowa blueprint and more toward the spread offense, Ohio State blueprint, I think has been dispelled. And it will be an interesting evolution for Ohio State because pretty clearly over the last couple of years, Michigan has shown the way to win in this league. And I think it's a more replicable blueprint for a lot of other schools, including Nebraska. So the fact that Matt Rule's kind of geared that way anyway, the fact that the Big Ten is kind of swinging back toward that identity, I think bodes well for Matt Rule's success in this league. I think he's already made some really nice headway in the state. People were wowed by his press conference a week ago today. And then he's followed it up by some impressive work on the recruiting trail in the state. And that's been a bone of contention among Nebraska fans because it's felt like a lot of talent has escaped the state's borders over the last decade. And that's part of the reason why Nebraska's fallen on harder times. I mean, Iowa took Noah Fant out of here. There are guys going to Oklahoma. And this is as talented a high school crop as there's been in this state. And so the idea that there isn't any talent here is not true. So Matt Rule's really work to rebuild those pipelines, especially to here in the Metro and Omaha, I think all that will eventually pay off for him. But I think the large, 30,000 foot view of the reaction to Matt Rule is overwhelmingly positive. It's not quite the rock star, gaga, head over heels that everyone was when Scott Frost was hired. But I think it's a very solid optimism that if he's able to do what he did at Baylor, Nebraska is going to be in good shape.
Yeah, is he still working on finalizing his staff? Is there going to be any guys that he's bringing back from the Frost staff? What does he all have as finalized staff so far?
Well, he's hired an offensive coordinator, Marcus Satterfield from South Carolina. He had a very good end of the season in his last 2 games. He's hired
out of a playoff.
Yeah, how about that? Yeah, he was the closer. His Gamecocks were kind of the Grim Reaper to those teams' hopes of the playoff. So he's hired an offensive coordinator. He's hired a special teams coordinator. He has filled out basically half of his staff. He's got his strength and conditioning coach. He does not have a defensive coordinator yet. And then there are a couple of spots that are still up for grabs on the staff. There are actually, I guess, 5 positions. I think most people anticipate that those will get filled up pretty quickly because, of course, the recruiting calendar is so accelerated. The transfer portal opened today. Coaches could get out on visits this past weekend. So, as I mentioned, I mean, Matt Rule was out and about. The other coaches were out and about. So there's some urgency. I feel like some things were held up because of the conference championship games. Now that those are done, I would be really surprised if this staff isn't almost done, if not all the way done, by the middle of this week.
Yeah. Oh, well, and there was some unfortunate events that happened with the interim head coach. Was there talk that he was going to be coming back before his incident?
It was at least a point of discussion. Matt Rule brought him up during the media session on Monday. I think there were some plans in place to at least talk. I don't know I don't know where Matt Rule was before the incident. Whether he was leaning one way, leaning the other, open to other possibilities. It's notable that the wide receiver position has not been filled to this point. So the wide receiver coach position, which tells me that there was at least going to be a pretty strong look given at Mickey Joseph. But with his arrest that occurred last week, I think that's pretty well off the table. So I think it was definitely out there. It was definitely something that could have happened. Now there's no chance.
Okay. What's kind of the vibe around Lincoln? Was there a lot of positive reaction to him, or there's kind of a little bit of a negative pushback, or what is the majority reaction around Lincoln, and then I guess on the broader spectrum, this whole state of Nebraska?
I think people are pretty excited. The week before, about Wednesday of Iowa week, or as normal humans would call it, Wednesday of Thanksgiving week, there was some discussion that, hey, Matt Rule might not be available. Matt Rule had kind of been, especially over the month of November, the leading candidate. And as we heard of some coaches accepting extensions, the big one was Lance Leipold at Kansas, because Lance had coached at Nebraska as a graduate assistant about 20 years ago. He had also worked off and on at UNO when they had a football program as a Division II. So he had some ties into the state. He had success at Kansas. There was some discussion that Lance Leipold would be a factor in this thing, but that went off the boards. And the name Bronco Mendenhall popped up middle of the week before the hiring of Matt Rule. And I think that scared a lot of people. and I think it also, I think Nebraska stepped up its game and made sure that Matt Rule would be coming here. Matt Rule discussed that it wasn't a straight line path. The president of the university system, Ted Cotter, who actually knew Matt Rule when Rule was at Temple and Cotter was with the Naval Academy. He had to intervene and help this thing across the finish line. So I think the fact that Nebraska got Matt Rule and not, somebody farther down the list was a positive. I think people felt good about the hire when it happened, when it was announced Saturday morning. I think people have felt better increasingly about the hire as he's gotten out there. He had a great press conference, as I said, Monday. I think people took a lot of energy and a lot of excitement from that. I was a little worried. The university made as big a deal as I've seen them make for a coach hiring, including the Scott Frost hiring. They invited fans to line the path from Memorial Stadium to the Hawks Center where they held it. They held the press conference in the Hawks Championship Center, the indoor practice facility, and not elsewhere in the stadium. And I mean, gosh, they walked out, they had the band going, they had pyrotechnics going, none of which they had when they hired Scott Frost. And I was a little worried that, hey, maybe Nebraska's overselling this, but I think it just added to it. And then I think the biggest thing that's really helped Matt Rule in the eyes of Nebraska fans is he's gotten out in the state. He's been visible in the state. He went to Lincoln High School, first off. And I mean, Lincoln High is in downtown Lincoln, which is not far from the Nebraska campus. And they happen to have a wide receiver that had committed to Iowa State. And, the most recent Nebraska staffs have seemed to take the state of Nebraska for granted. And the fact that Matt Rule and his staff made themselves very visible in going out and first visiting with Nebraska's the commits to this class that are from the state, and then secondly going into other high schools in Lincoln, in Omaha, and even outstate Nebraska to make themselves a presence. I think that was very valuable, and I think it's pretty important in rebuilding those talent pipelines back to the university and making sure that if there's a good football player in the Boulders, they play for the Huskers. Period. Amen. End of discussion. I'll give you an example. Gretna is an Omaha suburb. They finished second in the state this year. They won the state championship last year.
That was a crazy game. I saw the highlights on Twitter.
Oh yeah, ended with a 40-some yard field goal. The Gretna quarterback is going to Oklahoma State, and my understanding is Nebraska didn't recruit him hardly at all. And so that feeling that Husker coaches have kind of taken in-state talent for granted and undersold the in-state talent, that's something that I think Matt Rule and his staff have been really intentional about fighting against and trying to dispel right now, to where the state's high school coaches go back to the old days where they said, if you're a good player, you're playing in Lincoln.
I'll let you guys ask. I've been hogging all the questions so far. So
what do you think was the biggest reason Frost failed? Like, Wisconsin's own guy, was it an ego thing, lack of culture, missing on the Nebraska recruiting? Like, what do you think was the biggest reason?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think there were things that I don't know how well organized he was. You look back, especially in the early days of his program, his director of football operation, or his chief of staff, I should say, was a guy that hadn't worked in college football. And I don't think that was very helpful to him. I think, I don't know how well organized he was. There are all sorts of rumors and such about how he went about recruiting that, I don't think he was terribly well organized. I think he underestimated the effort that would be required. Recruiting, it's interesting. Nebraska, from just a pure recruiting ranking rivals standpoint, should have run roughshod through the Big Ten West. But because I don't think the staff developed talent terribly well and didn't have it very well organized, they fell well short. It was a situation where the sum of the parts was greater than the whole, which is not what you want. You want the opposite of it. I think there were some misses in recruiting that left Nebraska very thin. Nebraska had hardly any defensive linemen on the roster. And you think about that position. I mean, that's big guys getting ruled up on. That's a position where you need rotation. I mean, good teams are going at least 2 deep every spot. And Nebraska could hardly suit that up sometimes. So I think obviously there are a lot of things. And the other part is Big Ten football is well coached. It's football on the hard mode. This is not NCAA football, freshman mode. This is Heisman mode. And I think from a strategic standpoint, I think from a discipline standpoint, that staff just got beat and couldn't really get the program turned around in those respects. And then, once you start losing, the chatter and the momentum becomes negative, and it becomes very difficult to dig out of.
Yeah, Nate. I heard in Matt Rule's opening press conference, Trev Albert said it was important we got someone who can build this brick by brick, and then in return, you saw what Matt Rule did at Temple, and then Baylor, and how he got that 8-year contract. Is that something that you think Trev Albert needed to sit back and realize this could take a little bit? Let's give him some time with the length of this contract, and Matt Rule is going to do it the right way instead of thinking, hey, this will be a quick fix. Let's change things right away here.
Well, I think that there is a pretty deep commitment to Matt Rule, just, in terms of head coaching and also in terms of the resources he's getting. And yes, I think the length of the contract is a factor. You always worried with Rule because he had a significant buyout with the Carolina Panthers. You had to make a financial statement and commitment that you wanted him, or else he could sit out. And I think Nebraska made it pretty crystal clear where they see Matt Rule. As far as the length of the rebuild, I'm of 2 minds about it. I don't expect Nebraska to be in the college football playoff, in the next few years. But the tenor of college football, the setup of college football is such that it's as good a time now as ever to rebuild because of the transfer portal, because everybody, there's such a glut of talent. You just need to be very intelligent about identifying it, bringing it in, and developing it. And so from an organizational standpoint, I think Matt Rule will be in a good place to get this thing turned around fairly quickly, at least to the point where Nebraska is an 8-win team. Where Nebraska is competitive in basically every Big Ten game, is in that upper third of the league, even after realignment occurs with the addition of USC and UCLA. So I believe pretty quickly Nebraska can get there, upper third of the Big Ten, going to bowl games basically every year. The question that exists in my mind, and sort of the longer haul of this rebuild, is how do you take it from 8 wins, 9 wins, decent bowl game every year to 11 wins, 12 wins, winning the Big Ten championship, competing for the national championship. That's the part I'm not sure on. Because I'm convinced Matt Rule can get Nebraska to the 7-8 win level. The question is how much farther. And I think he'll get 7-8 wins relatively soon, perhaps next year.
Yeah, I was looking at their schedule. It sets up decently favorably for them. We'll see what he does within the transfer portal and guys he's able to retain and see how he finishes up recruiting because the recruiting is going to be tough because it's such a short window. And even though they did get on top of things hiring, it's still a lot of short turnaround to really get those guys that are kind of on the fence, try to get them overturned. But I think I watched his press conference, and you're absolutely right. He did knock it out of the park. And I think the one thing that stuck out with me with it was how he really connected with, I think, the Nebraska fan base. He talked about,
Mhm.
that's going to resemble the state of Nebraska, the process, the day by day, the hard work, the detail oriented people. And he wants guys that want to be Huskers and they want to be Nebraska men and they want to be able to honor that tradition and he wants to build something that the fans can be proud of and what they're spending money on. Um, and I think that's the best way to do it. I think if you
Mhm.
look at I think that's maybe what Nebraska got away from is, and you've alluded to it too, where they didn't want to recruit, or they took Nebraska, the state of Nebraska recruiting wise for granted, where he's gone more, I've seen him on Twitter a little bit now. And since I've gotten to know you, there's a lot of Nebraska stuff that just pops up on my Twitter feed. And where he was out in Scottsbluff over the weekend and like you said, going to Lincoln. Um, but it's the the culture and building that and getting guys that want to and understand the tradition of Nebraska. I think with NIL and
Mhm.
transfer portals and things like that, I think it's such a and it's coming true too. Where like you look at a place like Texas A&M, who threw the bag at a bunch of recruits, they're all gone.
Mhm.
Where I think this is the right way. And Matt Rule, his if you look at his previous jobs, he's built things from the ground up and he's been able to maintain it. He's been at spots where they're not really destination jobs where I think this is where if he was able to retire outside of maybe James Franklin leaving or getting let go, I think
Mhm.
this is a place Matt Rule would want to stay forever and retire here.
Well, you certainly hope for that. That obviously, I mean, shoot, as you guys mentioned, that's an 8-year contract. Let's see, he'll be pretty well along in his coaching career by the end of that contract. So, we'll see how much farther he goes past that. But if you do this job right, yes, it is a destination job. And, laugh at me all you want for saying this. This is a place you can win the national championship right now in this era of college football. Not to say that Nebraska is in a position to win it next year. Don't get me wrong, but there's not much that has to happen. And there's not much of anything that a coach has to do beyond just do right things with your program to get Nebraska in a place to win a national championship. You're going to have all the resources you could ever want. And the NIL thing's an interesting thing that you bring up because those efforts were fairly disorganized by all accounts at Nebraska in the years prior. There's a concerted effort being made right now to organize those better, because if they are well organized, that's a hell of a club to have in your bag as Matt Rule. You're going to have the money to get the player you want. There is no salary cap at Nebraska. But at the same time, it is balanced with that spirit that you mentioned of we're not just going to go grab the next shiny thing. If a kid's good, if a kid fits our culture, if he fits our schemes, we're going to go after him and we're going to have the most competitive package for him. But he's got to be right for us. And so I have a lot of faith in Matt Rule in how he builds things. I do wonder how the landscape of college football that changed a pretty fair amount, even in the couple of years he was in the NFL, will alter his timeline, alter his methodology in building a program. But if he's able to adapt to those, and I think he will be, Nebraska will be in good shape because this guy knows how to build a good football program, and he'll have the resources to take it even farther than he's taken a program before.
So Nate, we been talking about the transfer portal a lot here. Go back to last offseason. Casey Thompson goes from Texas to Nebraska. I'm just curious, what is does he have any years of eligibility left? Could he come back? Or would Matt, is he maybe going to dig into that to get his quarterback for at least the 2023 season?
That's unknown. That's unknown right now. Casey Thompson does have another year, so he could come back if he chooses. But he's also, an older kid, and I don't know what he's hearing in terms of NFL possibilities. He also has some business ambitions. Casey Thompson is partially of Native American descent. He's talked about opening gyms on reservations to try and encourage the Native population to be more physically fit, which has been a problem for them. And so, does he see now as the time to go in that direction? I don't know, but Casey does have another year to work with. I think we'll get a decision on that fairly soon. I think Thompson was treated pretty well here at Nebraska. He put out a pretty good year. He hurt his elbow toward the end of the year that I think really restricted him. But he was able to come back for the Iowa game, played very tough, stood in the pocket and led him to a win. So just guessing, and Thompson did attend the news conference on Monday. So if he was all the way out, he wouldn't have been there. And Thompson was quoted afterwards as saying, there are a lot of things that sound right with Matt Rule, that sound the way I would want them to sound. So there's some alignment there. I don't know, what conversations have taken place in the last, week and a half, but it does feel like it's at least a possibility that Thompson returns.
Okay. Yeah, he was a good player. He's a fun player to watch. He's athletic. He can throw the ball well. What is something that you want to see with Matt Rule? That's when Nebraska takes the field next year. What is something that you want them when you watch them on the field that you're going to be looking forward to see where they are the most improved?
I think just overall discipline. And, it's pretty simple. Penalties and turnovers. Do you limit the number of penalties you have? And for what it's worth, Nebraska cut back on those this year. But throughout the Scott Frost era, they would pick up penalties and they would usually be at the absolute worst times. So are you able to play fairly clean football? Some are going to happen. Who cares? But generally speaking, are you able to limit your penalties and are you able to limit your giveaways? Football's tough enough when you've got one opponent, the guy's wearing the different color jerseys. But when you're playing against yourselves and them, it's virtually impossible to win. So yeah, just don't give anything away. And hopefully down the road, if you don't give anything away, at some point you can take some things away and you can make big plays. But yeah, just eliminate as many mistakes as possible, as quickly as possible. And then we can go from there.
All right. I guess I got one more question. I know this is a little bit of a rivalry because the Huskers and they play them next year. What did you think of the Dion hire at Colorado?
Interesting. On one level, I think it's a really good hire for Colorado because that's a program that's dead in the water right now. And I say this with some, gritting my teeth a little bit because they beat Nebraska. This is the third time the teams are going to play in a 5-year span. Colorado beat Nebraska in what was actually Scott Frost's first game. First game was lightninged out. So his first game as the Husker head coach was the Colorado game. Nebraska lost it narrowly. And then the Huskers lost in overtime out there in 2019. But, Colorado football is irrelevant right now. All you had to do was flip on the television, watch them play, and that stadium is half full. And that's a market where if you struggle, they check out in a hurry. So the fact that they hired Deion Sanders, I think on some levels makes a lot of sense. Plus, I think Deion translates pretty well to the Pac-12. I don't, if there was a little murmur about him possibly coming to Nebraska.
There was a guy that
would not.
Because I want to say, sorry to interrupt, but
Yeah.
I want to say it was, I think it, and I laugh at this, but I think it was Zach Smith saying it was a done deal that he was going to Nebraska.
Yeah. It was a prevalent, it was at least a rumor that had gotten some traction. And for a variety of reasons, I think Deion Sanders would have been a terrible fit at Nebraska. I think a lot of flash, no substance. And to get to the point, at Colorado, I think that's what it's going to be. I think he's going to have a highly rated recruiting class. I think they're going to be pretty good on the perimeter. In the Pac-12, that can get you a ways. But I just don't, they may end up being a bowl team, which would be a quantum leap for Colorado football. But in the end, talking about winning and losing football, I just don't see him elevating Colorado football to the point where they're winning the Pac-12 and, nationally relevant beyond the fact that, hey, a prominent NFL player is coaching at Colorado. I found it interesting in the hiring press conference that was yesterday, that was Sunday. First off, the AD talked about efforts of keeping Nebraska fans out of Folsom Field. Husker fans overran Folsom Field in 2019. They will do the same again. Just forget it. Whatever efforts they put in, have to order from a Colorado area code, have to buy season tickets, doesn't matter. That place will be at least half red for the Colorado game. But secondly, they asked the athletic director, well, Colorado athletics can't be flush with cash right now. How'd you afford to pay for Deion? And he gave a nervous chuckle, and you could see the perspiration start to spring from his pores. and he said, we're working on it. And I mean, unless they charge $150 a head for the Nebraska game, which they might, Colorado isn't going to have the money. Now, how does that translate? That means his assistant coaching pool is going to be lesser. And for an inexperienced coach like Deion Sanders, you need people who can actually coach. I don't think he's going to have the money to do so. It'll hurt his recruiting budget. It'll hurt, whatever NIL operation they're able to put up. You're not going to have much of an NIL operation, especially in the long term at Colorado. So in the end, I see him as maybe a winning record at CU, but no more.
Yeah, I think what he did at Jackson State was great. I mean, he did a great job recruiting and with his NIL, but I mean, the record, he was playing, I mean, he got 4- and 5-star guys to go there, which credit to him to get him to go to an FCS school. But you're playing against guys that shouldn't be playing at Alabama, where he was playing with guys that could be going to Alabama and those places. And in the press conference, it was talking about, it just seems so me-centric, where it was all about him. I don't know. I feel like this could almost be like a Jimbo Fisher with the Texas A&M recruiting class, where it's bring in all these guys, but they're not going to mesh because at the FBS level and Power 5 level, where the talent gap isn't as big, you need to find some cohesion within the team. He's already saying that his son's going to be the quarterback. There's no competition. He's bringing a bunch of the rest of his guys from Jackson State. Like, that's just doesn't seem like that's a good way to win over a locker room. But
no, and I don't think it's a good way to build a program long term. I mean, no. You talk about the FCS level. Yes, his talent was just overwhelming compared to the others. He's in the Pac-12. He's going against Lincoln Riley. He's going against Chip Kelly. He's going against Kyle Whittingham. I mean,
Dan Lanning in Oregon.
Kalen DeBoer. Yeah, Kalen DeBoer had a great year. So,
John Smith at Oregon State too. That's not
Yeah.
a slouch program anymore either. And they've just
Right.
invested a bunch of money into facilities because they're redoing Reeser Stadium right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're going up 2 or 3 weight classes here as Deion Sanders. And I just don't I think it's asking a lot of him to that quickly go from coaching maybe high school to coaching FCS and at a SWAC school to now, hey, we're going to be in the Pac-12, we're going to win, and we're going to compete for the national championship, all at a
Mhm.
program where the support is pretty meager, and we're going to do it in a hurry. I just don't see it, and the me thing that troubled me too because this isn't FCS where it's, and you guys know better than me, what is it, 60 some scholarships for a program?
Well, because what's FBS is it 70?
85.
85.
85.
So FCS is 70. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So one high talent kid makes so much more of an impact on the FCS level than he does at the FBS level. So I just don't see how he's going to overcome that by just getting a bunch of kids, and especially the type of kid that you're going to get there. You talk about his press conference and his whole presentation being me centric. Well, that's the sort of kid you're going to attract. And if that's the kid you're attracting, man, that's going to be a tough locker room to wrangle. I just do not see it working out with much success at Colorado. I think the ceiling, quite frankly, is him going to a bowl game 2 years, 3 years in a row, and then going somewhere else, probably back toward the Southeast.
Yeah. I we'll see how it goes. I hope it works out. I think it'd be sweet to have Colorado be good, but
I don't know about that.
I knew you'd say
Keep them in the mud where they belong.
but I've heard it's one of the most beautiful campuses in the country. But one of the former D coordinators for Nebraska, Craig Bowl, former Bison coach as well, but he was talking to one of the Fargo writers back, I don't know how long ago it was, but they talked about it today on one of the radio shows I was listening to, and said that like Colorado is one of those places where they have all the resources in the world to be good. It's just there's just something around that place where it's just a very lazy culture.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I'm not so sure there isn't something to that, which is weird, but it has persisted historically. I mean, Bill McCartney built that thing up in the mid 80s, and they had that run really for about 15, 20 years where it sustained itself from the mid 80s until the mid 2000s. And Gary Barnett had the whole Katie Nida controversy. And that really threw that program for a loop, and they've not been able to recapture it. And there is something that holds that place back. It's a school that kind of has a foot in both camps, because even though they're in the Pac-12, they're still kind of out by themselves. So it's a little more blue collar mentality, but at the same time, there's also a huge piece of that campus. There's a huge part of that student body that comes from California, and is laid back, surfer vibe, all that. So yeah, there is something there. I don't know how to describe it. I don't know how to combat it, but I Craig's onto something there. That there's something weird that holds that program back.
Yeah. And then we'll go back to the Big Ten. What did you think of the Fickle hiring? Because you talked about how the Big Ten's got great coaches, which Harbaugh, Ryan Day, Rule now, Fleck, Kirk Ferentz, Jeff Brom, who seems to be a heck of a coach.
Sure.
just Brett Bielema seems to be having things going as well as you could ask for Illinois football. The, the coaching is very deep in the Big Ten. How do you think Fickle fits into that mix?
Oh, I think he deepened that pool all the more. I mean, the guy's a winner. He knows the Big Ten footprint as well as anybody, having played for Ohio State, having coached at Ohio State as long as he did. I guess I was a little surprised that he left Cincinnati because he has it going there, and now they're going to the Big 12. Now it's a discount Big 12, especially once Texas and Oklahoma leave. But he has it going at Cincinnati to where he could move into the Big 12 and be pretty prominent. But I think he's anticipating what we're all anticipating, which is sort of a split of college football, where the Big 10, the SEC, and then a few other programs that get life rafts are going to an upper echelon. And I think Fickle's getting himself positioned for that, and at the expense of Cincinnati and the Big 12. And he's just a terrific football coach. He's built a very solid program at Cincinnati. And the fact that he goes to Wisconsin, where they've had a tradition of winning, where they have an expectation of winning. The hire also tells me, by the way, that Wisconsin's willing to spend a little more on football. They've had kind of a weird dichotomy there about not wanting to spend on football, even though they've been good at it. And the Fickle hiring tells me, one, they're willing to spend on a head coach, and two, they're willing to spend on an assistant coach pool that would attract him. And they've had lots of assistants leave there. So I think Fickle's hiring to Wisconsin only steps up what's already probably the best coach league in the country. It's not the best talent league in the country, but it's the best coach league without question.
Yeah. Well, and the thing with Wisconsin too, where they're willing to spend money, which didn't make sense when their AD was the best coach that their football program has ever had, in Barry Alvarez. And then you look at, like, they've had just some kind of weird coaching situations where it seemed like they had coaches that were really had things rolling, and then they would leave to take other jobs, whether, Bielema going to Arkansas, and then I think it was Gary Anderson that was after him.
Gary Anderson.
He went to Oregon State, and then I can't remember who was after him, left for a different job as well, and then
Dave Aranda was on the Wisconsin staff and left as an assistant coach. I think Paul Christ was right after Anderson.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah,
but yeah, I think the interesting part about having a former coach as an AD, and we saw this some with Tom Osborne, he was very supportive of Bo Pelini in terms of what he said, and he would support him. But Osborne also had coached 15 years prior to when Bo Pelini had been hired, and the landscape of college football had changed a lot even from there. So I don't know, from a money standpoint, I don't know if everything Bo Pelini asked for, he got. But I can't speak for certain that he didn't get anything, right? But it's just such a different landscape in college football. Things change so rapidly in a 10-year span, in a 5-year span, even in the span, as I mentioned, that Matt Rule was in the NFL 3 years with the NIL, with the COVID year. So how that pertains to Wisconsin and Barry Alvarez is the fact that Barry probably thought to himself and said, well, I didn't have this, that, or the other thing when I was coaching, and turns out I won Rose Bowls and got to Pasadena quite a bit. Why do you need it? And then I think that is folded in with a fairly restrictive academic culture at Wisconsin. I think they pride themselves on being a public school, one of the best public universities in the country. And the real world football impact of that is they're reluctant to take transfers. They took Russell Wilson, and they've took others, but it's tough to get a transfer there, and they absolutely will not take a junior college guy there. It's rare to get a JUCO guy there. And so when you're at Wisconsin, you're already kind of fighting uphill because of the weather and being in the Big Ten. And then you're telling me I can't recruit JUCOs, and especially in the brave new world of college football, I can't take as many transfers as the other guy. Those are some restrictions. Those are some limitations. And, that I'm sure that's something Luke Fickell addressed when he talked with the Wisconsin administration. They have a new athletic director in Chris McIntosh. And, I wouldn't be surprised if he's pledged to be a little more aggressive and a little more permissive of Wisconsin using their resources to their full advantage to build a great football program.
Did you see how much they gave his assistant pool?
I did not, but I'm sure it was a big pile.
7.25.
7.25.
Yeah.
Oof. Yeah, that sounds right. I mean, the talk has been that Jim Leonard could possibly stay there, especially after not getting the head coach job. It would take a pretty big check with 2 commas in it and probably a crooked number on the side of the first one to keep him. And I think Wisconsin's ponying up. We understand that college football, it's the arms race just got flipped into hyperdrive with the television contracts that are coming down for the Big Ten and the SEC, with the 12-team playoff. We've kicked everything into hyperdrive. And, a program like Wisconsin has to sit there and say, are we going to be a big time football program? Nebraska, just the same. Everybody, Iowa, Minnesota, Illinois, on down the list. Are we going to try to compete at a high level? And I think Wisconsin has understood that that's going to take a little greater commitment than they're used to.
Yeah. And then you guys got any other questions for Nate?
Just one quick one, Nate. Kind of the one weird stat or one negative you'll find from Rule's hiring was his record against ranked teams, 0-11. Has that about over this last week and a half, or is it more or less we're still in the honeymoon stage? Look what he's done at 2 programs. We trust him. He'll get that win against a ranked opponent.
Well, I don't think that it's been too big a negative. It has been brought up. Don't get me wrong. And people have discussed it. I think that statistic gets tempered by the idea, okay, how many times was he favored? How many times did he have a superior talent pool to the other team? And I mean, if you're running into Oklahoma, you're running into Texas, and I would suspect a lot of those 11 losses are against them. The odds are not good for you. So I don't think people are too troubled by it. They're aware of it. But I think that right now for Nebraska football, that's a secondary concern. Job one is to win the games you're supposed to win. When you lose to a Georgia Southern, when you are the only win that a bad Northwestern team picks up, hey, I want to beat ranked opponents, but I definitely want to take care of Northwestern and Georgia Southern. And I have full confidence that Matt Rule will do that. And then hopefully we're then in a position to be one of the top 25.
Yeah, well, and the other part of it too is you have to go look at what Baylor was when he walked into that job, because that was a program on the doorstep of almost getting the death penalty, almost being just from what happened with the whole Art Briles scandal. And then Temple, I think there might have been some they had some stuff going on there as well where they had some NCAA violation. I'm not positive, but I mean, he built those programs from the ground up.
Yeah. So, and I mean, Baylor was playing in a Sugar Bowl within 3 years. And I mean, Art Briles, that whole crew had run that. Yes, they had built them up, but they had also left it in shambles. And so like I said, I'm not troubled by his struggles against ranked opponents. I think he'll get plenty of chances at Nebraska where he's on more equal footing. The fact that Baylor was able to step up to that height was pretty exciting. And we'll see what he can do now that he has the full complement of resources.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I got one more question before a little bit of a lighthearted one. Did you tick off any fan bases this year like you ticked off the Iowa fan base in 2021?
Well, there were some Husker fans grumbling about me. We were struggling
Uh-oh.
on third down. So, no, the third down thing kind of took on a life of its own when we couldn't complain about the team as much just because they were struggling as much as they were. It was just kind of a foregone conclusion. So, and didn't tick off any opposing fan bases, didn't tick off any other coaches, which disappointed me. God, I enjoyed that when I was getting tweets that was in Ferentz's ears, even though I think it was our music guy who was really bugging Ferentz. But
can you share like kind of the story of that? It was 2021, it was Nebraska,
Sure.
Iowa the day after Thanksgiving, and I'm going on Twitter and I'm seeing you liking tweets about Iowa complaining about.
Well, yeah, early in the game, the Iowa coaches called a timeout when they had an offensive third down because, like at a lot of stadiums, Nebraska plays loud music after a second down, leading into a third down. And last year, I added an elongated third down, so I would call second down. Second down play, ball carried by Spencer Petras, tackle made by Johnson, gain of 3 yards on the play. And then from the 28-yard line, it's 3rd and 8. And I would hold third as long as I could in some
It was a
situations.
long time. I remember the Ohio State one sticks out in my mind where I remember you held it for, it was like, I didn't count, but it felt like it was like 20 seconds.
Yeah, I would try to hold it. And meanwhile, our music guy is hitting big music. We're talking AC/DC. We're talking big guitars, loud as it can be. And we're pushing it. We're getting close. I think he was going right up to when the center was coming over the football. And you're supposed to cut all artificial noise when the center actually gets over the ball, puts his hand on it, and prepares to snap it. And I think we were still on the right side of that, but we were close. And I think in a bit of gamesmanship, Kirk Ferentz was trying to cut that earlier. Remember, the year before, it had been a point of contention that that Nebraska was being thrown off when they were on offense by Iowa's defense, giving disconcerting signals. And so I think we were trying to push third downs a little bit. Kirk was aware of that and came after us. And there was a sideline report that we heard, and I saw it on social media when he called that timeout with them on offense on third down, saying he was calling the timeout because there was too much noise in the stadium and too much artificial noise on third down. And me being a part of the effort, I took great pride and pleasure in that. Of course, Iowa ended up winning the game, so he got the last laugh. But as a PA guy, you feel like, well, I gotta do everything I can to help this thing out, and that was my meager effort.
Okay, well, I was glad. We've had you on. This is, I think, what, the fourth time you've been on, and I've been meaning to ask you it every time, but it finally I've never gotten around to it. So I'm glad I was finally able to. So thank you, Nate, for joining us. We'll have to get you on possibly, I guess. Well, I know you're a baseball fan. The
Sure.
Royals have a new stadium, so maybe as baseball season gets closer, we'll have you on, help us discuss some Royals baseball and kind of the state of the Royals, because there sounds like they could be on the move.
Well, things are starting to move with them. The stadium just got proposed, so we're still a few years away. But yeah, the thought of baseball is getting me through this cold, dark December.
Yeah.
Although it's colder and darker for you guys, from what I'm told. So
This is true, but there are hopefully brighter days ahead for your Huskers. So we'll talk to you next time, Nate. Thank you.
hey, glad to be with you, gentlemen.